Dark, MS, LSW, substance abuse professional, mental health first aid. Fundamentals of addiction in a post-pandemic world. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I appreciate you all being here to learn about, and kind of refresh our memories around the fundamentals of addiction and also looking at it from the lens of a world where, we have been impacted by a pathogen and now we're living in this kind of new reality in a post-pandemic world. And what we want to do is we want to be able to develop this new sensitivity around how it looks a little bit differently, how people have been using, substances as coping mechanisms. We know that alcohol consumption is up 60%. Video game streaming is up 100%. So clearly people are using, these ways to medicate, to escape in order to kind of, help ourselves get through some of these moments. But of course, also we're going to see some of these things spiral out into a place where people aren't in charge of being able to stop when they want to, of being able to be in control and not feel compulsive to use it. So we really want to, take a look at this once again so that when we are working with individuals who may be experiencing substance abuse disorder or just abusing substances and aren't really sure what to do with that, that we are, uniquely equipped to be able to utilize language, to have an awareness around these, unique impacts of an outbreak, and to use that language that really validates, what their experience is, because only in that way, when we can present it in that way, when we can show that we have that empathy and that understanding and we have those compassionate conversations, that's when we build those relationships with those that we serve as mental health ambassadors. That's when people trust us to share, what their experience is without being fearful, without feeling as if they're being judged, and, having alongside that unique understanding of what they're experiencing is so very important, especially in this time. We want people to reach out. We want people to reach out sooner rather than later because we do understand that, looking at, experimentation and then on the one end of the continuum and then addiction on the other, what we see is, cucumber, 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 cucumber as we're going down the continuum. And then, when we get to addiction, we're looking at a pickle. And so, because that brain chemistry changes and it's really difficult to undo a lot of that. So that's why it's important for us to be able to have these conversations and really try to use language where, again, people feel safe to share with us. People feel safe and trust that we will be able to care for them. So that's why it's important for us to be able to, kind of re-examine once again the fundamentals of addiction, but also getting that as a refresher, but also looking at it again in the lens of a post-pandemic world. So what we want to do is, learn how to provide with those struggling with addiction. Some of the things that we've learned about is, using the words addiction. We're going to try to, even move away from that. We know that we shouldn't be using the words addict anymore. We really even want to try to not use the word addiction because a lot of people may not recognize it as such. And really, those words sometimes seem scary. So we want to be able to learn how we can provide for those who are struggling and family members also, especially now that people are living in close quarters and without the ability to, patronize certain places and socialize with their friends and be able to do business as normal. We have a lot of people who are living with those who are struggling with addiction. And so we want to also be available for those who are living with those and how they are being impacted as well. And we want to be able to take a look at some tools to make some of those determinations. So like, what are we looking at here? How can we diagnose this appropriately? How we can make the correct determinations? How we can develop the most appropriate treatment plans? How we can create those partnerships are all a very much valuable part of, the fundamentals of addiction. But additionally, as I said, in our current climate, we also have the additional layers of social unrest and outrage. So there's a lot going on here. And we really need to be able to kind of unpack this in a way that really makes sense for what we're experiencing, because this is not normal everyday life. We don't have access to all the resources we normally have access to. We don't have access to the supports that we normally have access to. We don't have the freedom to move about to get those resources. And so, that's a real big challenge that we have right now. So it's really important for us not to miss out on opportunities to create those partnerships, to have people come to us and see us as a resource and a support in order to be able to get the help that they need to move forward with their lives. And as much as we want to do these things and learn about these things, the issue is that we need to have confidence. Because if we don't feel confident in the skills that we possess, then we're not going to flex those skills, right? Much like if you learn a foreign language and then you finally find yourself, with someone who's a native speaker of that language, and you just don't feel confident enough to actually try to verbalize a sentence because you're afraid that they might say something back and you won't know what to say after that. And so you don't feel confident enough, so you don't speak up. And the same applies here. If we don't feel confident enough that we really understand what's going on, that we really have a grasp of the whole picture and in the context of our current reality, of our new reality, we may not feel confident enough to ask some of those difficult questions, and especially questions around catastrophic events like homicide and suicide, and being able to, parse some of those things in order to be able to develop a crisis plan, an agreement. A lot of us sometimes we think, if we bring the subject up, that we're actually going to get people thinking about it. And in fact, the research does not support that. So we need to also be a part of making sure that if people are in crisis, how we can be helpful in creating an agreement, a commitment, a partnership around keeping them safe so that they can continue to get the help that they need, so they can move out of crisis and hopefully, move into a place where they are beginning their path onto virtuous cycles as opposed to continuing these vicious cycles that they're currently in. And, finally, there are going to be some barriers, again, that are tied into this contemporary climate that we're in. We want to be able to understand those and to make sure that we are looking at those as well and addressing those as well to be able to help those that we serve as the new frontline. We're the new frontline. Mental health is going to be exponentially a bigger and bigger service as we move forward with people feeling isolated and people developing substance abuse disorders and people, depression, anxiety, suicide. We've already seen these things on the rise. This is nothing new to those of us who, do play the role as mental health ambassadors. And so now we know, of course, that these things are going to continue to grow. So that's why it's also important for us because we know that a lot of mental health issues do have a dual diagnosis with substance abuse disorder. So it is really important for us to be able to, check out those barriers and make sure that we get those out of the way so that we can be able, again, to be able to build those bridges and help those that we want to serve so that we can help everyone, including ourselves, in terms of feeling as if we're valuable and we're providing a valuable service and we are actually helping people and making a difference and, trying to, help society to get through all of this. So, these are some of the things that we're going to learn about here today. And before we leave here today, you will have the confidence, you will know what barriers to eliminate, you will uniquely understand the impacts, the psychological impacts of outbreaks, and you will be able to feel confident to make those diagnostic determinations and also, finally, most importantly, to make sure that we don't miss someone who's in crisis. Okay, so, looking at an outbreak, outbreaks have, particular responses. So, just like me and just like you, we probably all in the very beginning, we reacted, we're angry, we feel conflicted, we don't trust what's going on. I mean, I didn't know if I needed to board up my doors and, lock ourselves up in the basement, or if I needed to, pack up the car with a bunch of food and head for the hills. The fear that we were experiencing, and even to some degree now, immobilizes us. We don't know what to do. We're not able to take action. And if we understand the stress response, we know that, when we experience fear and anger, this shuts down our frontal lobe because that's part of our survival, our body's survival way, primal man, how we handle those situations. So we are the same humans that we've been for the past 50,000 years biologically, with just some modifications in the frontal lobe. And so, when we experience fear and anger and things, of really emotional things like that, our frontal lobe kind of shuts down so that we can only think with our instinctual brain. And so when we're experiencing this ongoing, we're unable to think of creative solutions to our problems. We're unable to develop partnerships. We're unable to think about making a better choice around how we're going to handle something. So these specific responses to the outbreak, triggers these feelings of emergency. Things are fatal, things are happening quickly. I don't have resources. Maybe you do, you just have forgotten about them. But this complexity and this information overload and the rumors and so on and so forth, is going to require a high level of professional need. And, it's going to be challenging because, not only are we dealing with this complexity as providers, but we're also dealing with this complexity as individuals ourselves. Maybe ourselves as well. One glass of wine per night is turned into almost a bottle. Maybe we have been escaping into our televisions and surfing the net and playing video games. We ourselves are being subjected to the same exact things. So I'm hoping in today's program, we can get some relief by getting to understand what's going on as well. So this is just as much for you as it is those who are you going to serve. So again, this uncertainty is also something that you're experiencing because you don't know what to do and you don't know what's going to happen next and what to recommend. So it is especially challenging, and that's why we're doing today's program, and you will get to understand things a little bit more deeply, and again feel more confident to be able to provide that treatment. So again, unclear direction, uncertain factors. Now, what we want to start thinking about here is helping ourselves and those that we serve understand and validate that we get it, that things are sudden and every day something is different, and there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of things that are unexpected and that we're not prepared for. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in today's program. Is we're going to talk about how we can prepare everyone that we're working with, including ourselves, how we can actually prepare for the unexpected by expecting the unexpected is one of those things we're going to talk about. And also, knowing that there's a lot of variability, things are fast developing, there's a lot of instability going on and high frequency changes. We have people who are wanting to go back to work, other people who are too afraid to go back to work, other people who want to go back to work but feel like their freedoms are being taken from them. We have people who want to send their kids to school 5 days a week. We have people who don't want to send them at all. We have people in between. We have people who are complaining that they don't want to wear masks, and other people who are being, very judgmental about it, and lots of anger and arguments. So all of these things are happening right now. And one of the things that I want us to also understand is that everyone's perception is their reality. So if you are kind of in a place where maybe you've kind of moved out of feeling like this is such an emergency, and maybe you're more optimistic and hopeful, or maybe you have the ability to kind of see the long-term picture. And one of the long-term pictures that I try to help people take a look at to kind of start to calm people down a little bit, because no matter what the situation actually is, being panicked about it, being afraid, being angry isn't going to serve us no matter what. It isn't going to change the outcome to worry about it obsessively looking at news cycles. It isn't going to serve us whatsoever. So when we start to look at it in terms of, okay, this is normal, we're validating this. This is what the stressors are right now. This is the response that happens when something sudden like this occurs. That's okay. We were validating this, but let's take a look at this in a larger lens, a long-term lens. Let's think back to September 11th. We had a catastrophic event. Thousands of Americans died, a terrorist attack on American soil, which we hadn't seen, to that measure since Pearl Harbor. But then we saw that we learned from the media, from thwarted attempts that they had stopped. Then we started seeing attacks happen, terrorist attacks happening all over the globe. And suddenly we had a system of colors, of red lights and orange lights and yellow lights. And if you can remember being in that moment, you wondered, do I continue living in this city if I lived in a large city? Do I need to be afraid to fly again? Everyone was afraid to fly again. But then we started taking measures, like I said, putting in those like lights to let people know how dangerous things were. We put in TSA security at the airport. We put in those security measures. We created military, globally, military where exercises happened, not exercises, where missions happened, where we, eliminated people who were responsible as a counterattack. So that happened. So that was one thing. And then if we want to talk about things that are closer to more like what we're experiencing now with the pathogen, we've gone through West Nile. We've gone through Zika, we've gone through H1N1 before, Ebola, we've gone through some of those things. And, again, alarming things, maybe not as alarming as the thing that we're currently in, because it's always the thing that we're currently in that's alarming. And for those who have ever been through a really big accident or have had children, that moment, those things that happened when you were going through it were really intense, just like we're experiencing everything right now, very intensely. But then when we look at it in hindsight, not as intensely. Here's some other examples. Mass shootings, right? We had mass shootings of, people going into schools and killing children. We had mass shootings in the public, people opening fire. Now, when these things happen, I remember crying, and I remember, wondering if I can send my kids to school, and, is it safe for me to go outside? But we kind of, as things become a little bit more distant, we kind of learn to live with these horrible, horrible things, because we learned that the fact is the world is a dangerous place. So this is not being blasé about what's going on right now, but especially for clients who cannot get out of this and, really kind of be able to have those moments where, okay, I recognize that this is dangerous. I recognize that this is happening. I recognize that this is impacting me. However, I need to kind of get out of this emergency type situation. Sometimes that might be helpful. And so that can help them try to de-escalate instead of using chemicals and substances to be able to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. But also helping us understand that everyone's perception is their reality. So regardless of how I see the situation, how your client sees the situation is their reality. And that's why, rather than try to counter what their experience is, we can assist them into them perceiving it differently. And let me help you understand what I mean by that. So perception is reality. So if, let's say, I'm holding a stick and I'm looking at this stick and I'm a dog, I see a toy. If I'm an angry person, I see a weapon, right? If I am a musician, I'll see an instrument of some kind, whether it's a conductor's baton or maybe it's a drumstick. If I'm someone who's cold, I see firewood. Or maybe I'm just someone who looks at this and says, it's just a stick. So if I'm holding the stick, depending on my point of view, my perception, I see a toy, a weapon, an instrument, fire, or just a stick, and we are all correct. So rather than, me bringing up some of that other stuff doesn't mean we don't validate. We want to validate people where they are, but maybe help them see the larger picture, maybe see outside of this feeling of emergency and urgency, which may be hindering their ability to actually work through some of their issues with substance abuse, okay, and maybe even addiction. So that's kind of what the kind of overarching psychology is around what's going on right now. But let's look at this a little bit more in a practical way. So when I'm working with a client, I can have these big, abstract conversations, but that doesn't really help me get to the point where I'm really going to have conversations about their daily lives, and I'm really going to be able to listen for cues that might help me find out that they may be experiencing addiction problems, substance abuse problems. So some of the things that you might hear your clients say, right, are, oh, my boss is on my case. Another person complained about my work. Work performance will begin to decrease when people have all this stress around them and additionally using substances. You might hear your client's patient say, the old lady is always on my case. Okay, now we see this is an indication that relationships are suffering, right? And again, this could just be just the stress, or it could be combined with that. But we want to start listening for some of these messages. We might hear people say things like, "Oh, I used to go to the gym, but I'm not going anymore." Or, I really used to enjoy gardening, but I don't feel like doing it anymore. So the balance that they used to hold in their lives is no longer available to them. So their lifestyle becomes imbalanced. So listen for some of those changes in their particular norms. And you might also hear them talk about ways that it's manifesting physically. Oh, I keep having this ache in my right. I keep having headaches. Even they might feel they can't go to sleep. Their mind is racing. So some of those things that we're starting to see the body impacted. And again, this is from that stress response where people are constantly exposing themselves to adrenaline, and now we have abundance of cortisol, and our gastrointestinal systems are shutting down to prepare our muscles for fight, flight, or freeze. Our hearts are beating quickly. Where these are things where we're constantly being in a state of stress. We know that this also impacts the immune system. So we'll see health problems arise or even worsen. People's chronic illnesses might come out of remission. And of course, I also mentioned this earlier, depression, anxiety, becoming apparent and even overwhelming, where people just cannot get out of bed. They cannot go outside. They just can't function. And so, because again, this feeling of lack of control. And we want them to feel like they have some control over that. But, we need to understand also something unique about the mental health inside of a pandemic. So these three terms here are very unique to what we're experiencing right now. So to be able to have this language and to be able to utilize this language again to help them parse as well what their experience is, because we've never heard these terms before. So one of them is communal suffering. As communities, we rely on our healthcare systems to be available for us. We rely on our school systems, our educational systems to be there for us. We rely on our jobs to be there. We rely on, financial markets. And now we're seeing all of these destabilize. And even though the market might look good one day, another day it isn't, you just never know. And, as I mentioned earlier in the program, parents like myself have no idea what's going to happen in the fall. We saw that our healthcare systems were vulnerable. And this is a suffering that we experience as a community, where all these things that we trusted and we believed in and we leaned into, now we are afraid that they may not be available to us. Companies announcing on a daily basis that people are getting furloughed, so people don't know if there's job security, and that's a large portion of our identity. It's particularly in American culture, and also obviously lots of families like working and living hand to mouth, and now we have also working families facing the possibility of their children not being in school 5 days a week. So this is a communal suffering that also adds onto it. So when we hear clients talk about, I can't take it, this is driving me, crazy, and I'm hitting the bottle, or I'm using marijuana, or whatever the case may be, when we can let them understand a little bit more clearly what is going on, and developing that awareness also empowers us not only to make different choices, but empowers us to understand it better. So I can say, okay, I understand that this is something that I've always relied on and now it's failing me, and it may not be forever if I'm looking at this world term view, but certainly, being in this emergency mode isn't helping me, and using substances for me to medicate or escape isn't also helping me. But at least now I can grasp it, and now I feel validated, and I know exactly, I know a direction that I need to go into. So again, this kind of helping us once again to build those relationships. Collective grief, it's one thing to experience a loss, but it's another thing to be in a society where everyone is collectively grieving. It's challenging to be out there and to not feel sad and not to feel like you've walked into some type of dystopian society. I mean, people have lost so many things: a sense of safety, their social connections, financial security, and it goes on and on and on. And whereas in when things were normal, and obviously we also need to grieve the loss of that normal, we'll probably never see a world like that again, but that's okay, because just like we're in a post-terrorist attack kind of situation, and that's going to the airport and taking off your shoes and pulling out your laptop is normal. Some of these things that we see here today are going to be the normal also, and people are still going to grumble about it, just like they do. But it's one thing to be grieving and everyone else around you is kind of doing their normal. It's another thing when everyone else around you is also. And so you may not reach out to others. You may feel as if other people are probably going through the same exact thing. So why would I burden others with my grief? So that's the other thing too, is we don't even want to burden other people, even though we've even lost some of those social connections. To feel okay with reaching out is probably a larger challenge than it ever has been. Moral injury is another one, again, unique to the situation. We've had people who have had to make choices that go against their values and their beliefs, or maybe they mistakenly infected someone else, or maybe it's a doctor who had to make a choice about who to save, or maybe it was a parent who doesn't want to put a mask on their little child, and they feel as if they're isolating from their friends. And this is running the gamut here, because a lot of choices are being made for us, and sometimes we don't have choices. And so that moral injury is really complicated and difficult to unpack, because there's a lot of shame and guilt involved with that, and a lot of demoralization. And it's really hard when you're suffering from those things to be able to even try to see anything with the lens of any kind of hope or capability or self-confidence. So this is what we're seeing happening here, folks. And again, this is so important for us to be able to share this, to help people have the words, because there's a great book by Desmond Tutu called Forgiveness, and one of the things that he says in the book, and I've always loved this, the path to healing, you have to be able to tell your story and name your hurt. And this allows people to name that hurt and then be able to tell that story. So that's very helpful. But the additional thing that's helpful is that you now are asking the right questions around what's going on with their work performance and their relationships, and asking how they're feeling about the destabilization of these community institutions, and ask them how they feel about the fact that a lot of people are grieving, and what their losses are, and maybe what things they've had to decide to do that were not in line with their beliefs, and how that makes them feel. So we want to be able to ask the right questions, and of course listen, but we also need to know all of our resources. There's so many resources out there right now, that every single website, mental health websites, substance abuse mental health websites, county, city, state, federal, they all have, at the very top, COVID-19, resources and so on and so forth. So please know your resources. They're ongoing. This is much bigger than what you are going to be able to do alone, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how amazing you are. This cannot be done with just you alone. Please make sure that you are very knowledgeable of the current resources out there, and you take advantage of them in a way that serves your client. all kinds of resources, even ones that have to do, even ones that deal with addiction, or deal with depression, anxiety, because we know about dual diagnosis. So we want to make sure we need to do our homework, before we really embark on a journey of healing and treating our those that we are serving. We really need to stay abreast of all of those things, because a lot of the times it's financial. And there's a lot of grants that are out there. I mean, just the other day I was reading about a grant that's being given out to women entrepreneurs and who have small business or small business owners. And sometimes, just a small grant of $1,500 can be what they needed to get by this month to get to the next month. And hopefully, within 30 days, things kind of calm down. So it's really, really important that you stay abreast of all of those and do your homework, as you are working with people in this post-pandemic world, in our new reality. Okay, so now that we've kind of set the stage about what's going on and what's going on with mental health and how people are responding to the outbreak and those terms that we talked about, communal suffering, collective grief, and moral injury, let's take a look and have a little bit of a refresher, about the use, abuse, dependence, addiction continuum. So everybody starts somewhere where it's called experimentation, but no one has a drink, takes a puff, whatever. And no one does that and says, oh, you know what? I cannot wait to be an alcoholic. Nobody does. I mean, and we all know too that there's a lot of reasons why people, start to use and misuse. We know that alcohol is highly glamorized, even drugs a lot, especially marijuana, now the same thing in, media. And so people might start to misuse it, or peer pressure, being on college campuses. But now we have something else that's leading to people abusing substances. They are locked up, they're isolated, they have a lot of time on their hands. The days aren't the same. They're working from home. They have all these pressures. So we have an additional reason why people are starting to abuse substances. And when I talk about substances, I mean, obviously, we are trained with drugs and alcohol typically, but let's talk about some other things that people are abusing. I mentioned this earlier: video game addiction, video game streaming up 100%. A lot of people are going to have this issue, especially young adults are going to have this issue. So I want us to start thinking about digital drugs as well. People abusing, being on social media, people abusing food, emotional eating, people abusing pornography because they don't have any other social connections, gambling, shopping even. Think about all the packages, the Amazon packages that you're seeing. People are doing whatever it is they can do to get by right now. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to understand that this abuse doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to head to addiction, but they can if we don't start making that intervention happen, because we talked about that. Cucumber, 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 pickle. So we really want to start to look at abuse a little bit differently, in terms of it's not necessarily something that's going to lead to addiction. I mean, that's never the case, but we want to kind of view it again, having the understanding that people are doing this because really times are just really challenging. So looking at it a little bit differently in that way and having a little bit more empathy around it. So people are using things more, that people are starting to do it chronically, so the frequency increases and they can't control it. When we start to hear people say these words, we really do need to, very seriously talk to them about getting some type of treatment. And so one of the things that I've heard people who, serve others who may be substance abusing is, you need to get sober first before you go into treatment. No, because right now that is something that we want to discourage, because any type of treatment that people can get, any type of resource, any type of connection, we want them to feel like they can access that, and then let that provider who's working with them, who has knowledge of that, help them work through some type of harm reduction model. But right now, things are way too intense and way too overwhelming for us to focus on an abstinence model in this moment and this day and time, because they don't have the same supports they would normally have. So please, any kind of support that they can get, any type of connection they can make with anyone, please, make sure that they're doing that regardless of where they are here at this continuum. Because, as I mentioned, that's maybe the only support system that they have right now. So that's something, again, that's a little bit different when we're looking at the fundamentals of addiction in this post-pandemic world. So again, looking for indicators, because it's not always going to be the case that people are going to be open about that, right? It takes a while for someone to open up. And this is why, that's another reason why we're talking about these things, because when you can, show your client that you have this understanding of what's going on, and so it's all seated within this current climate and this world of COVID, and this world of pathogens, and this world of masks, and this world of conflict, and everything getting politically charged, and and things being closed and being open and being closed again. There's a lot here. But when we can begin to understand, again, give that language, then when we start to see things like attendance, in anything that they can attend, like attending in family activities, attending in caring for their bodies physically, attending in their spiritual lives, attending in anything that they had once enjoyment for, that's something that, again, is an indicator. And that's where we really want to, again, try to have some of those conversations around, hey, what's going on? Let's talk about this. When you see accidents happen, again, the performance declines, whether it's a performance as a parent, as a partner, right, or as an employee, and those interpersonal difficulties. And we are seeing a lot of interpersonal relationship issues right now, obviously, because people are, again, stuck together without their normal lives, without their normal resources. A lot of people contemplating divorce, a lot of people substance abusing because they want to get away with it, because they want to medicate, they feel neglected, whatever the case may be. So again, looking for some of these indicators to really generate those conversations to get to the bottom of this. We really don't want to miss an opportunity to make an intervention happen. And when we traditionally think of intervention, obviously we talk about everyone getting around and so forth. Either you're not part of us anymore, or you go to treatment. What I mean by intervention is being able to let people know about their options, because a lot of the times people, when they think about, oh, if I'm going to go get treatment for this, I have to walk into a room like AA and I have to say, hi, my name is Ria. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, or I'm just an alcoholic, I'm just an addict. That's really hard for people to do in a normal circumstance, let alone having to do that now, especially when people are afraid for their job security, where people don't know if they're going to be in a relationship tomorrow or not, where people don't know if they're going to be in their homes anymore. It's really hard for them to add that layer on. So when we explore options, as I mentioned, number one, really, we want people to get help no matter what. Make a connection with anyone no matter what. But also, a lot of people think about these treatment options that they're kind of punitive, that again, they're going to have to wear this label. It's not necessary for them to wear the label to get help and to get better. It really isn't. So we can let people know, there is intensive outpatient, but that's for people who, are lost control. It's getting in the way of their ability to perform their jobs. It's getting in the way of their ability to provide for their families or to be a family member. But they don't have to go to residential, even if it is that serious. So they can do intensive outpatient, where they're really working on things, and then they can come home. And that, a lot of businesses will support these programs as well. A lot of people think, when they think of their jobs, and they think that if they say something that they're going to lose their jobs, but they don't have to. They don't have to say anything to their managers per se. They can just go to their EAP program and seek help from that. And everything that they seek from there is confidential and it has no cost. So that's another important layer to add in there. I've been doing a lot of trainings with EAP professionals and global corporations that offer EAP services, and we are getting ready for the onslaught because a lot of these businesses know that we're having people come into the workspace who have suffered trauma, who suffered isolation, who are substance abusing, who also are really uncomfortable with having to work, but we have to get back to work. We have to provide services. There are people that are counting on these services. So EAPs have been really, really rolling out really robust programs and a lot great support. So that's one way they can start to access some of these services. And EAP also pays for a lot of these. So, but they can just do outpatient, and they can just do self-help groups. I'm a huge fan of self-help groups because self-help groups, they are people just like us, and they know what our particular experience is like. And there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of networking that goes on there. So, if there's a self-help group that, is available in their city, depending on where things are in terms of, how their governor's going about business, I really recommend that they get a hold of a support group because that's just a good way to start. A lot of the times people, and support groups also, that whole networking part of it, people will approach them and they develop relationships. We really do need to increase some of those things. A lot of people have lost that. And I know myself as well. I'm extremely gregarious and outgoing, and I've tried my best to try to keep contact and try to keep things alive, but it just feels like it's a dead end on the other line, and it's disheartening sometimes. In a self-help group, if I really felt this, things were getting to the point where I was, starting to feel as if I was developing depression, or, for me, my issue a lot of times is I feel a tsunami of anxiety coming onto my chest, and, then I feel immobilized. A lot of the things that we talked about in the first slide, I know a self-help group or seeking the help of a counselor are probably the two top things that would be helpful for me. Okay, so let's get into the 8 most commonly abused drugs. No surprise here, alcohol is number 1, and you're going to see the same thing as well. And so, and again, it's normalized, it's legal, it's glamorized, right? So alcohol, just think about this. If you think about going to a wedding and you find out that it's a dry wedding, so many people will be like, wait, what are you talking about? Or think about 4th of July. Going to a 4th of July barbecue. Obviously a lot of us probably spent that alone with whoever we were with or just in isolation. Alcohol is part of the mix, right? Hey, we can't celebrate unless there's alcohol. The word celebrate, already brings that word alcohol to mind. So we really do want to kind of think about, how it's not viewed as something that's bad for you. So it's a little bit harder. So want to focus a little bit more on how the consumption's impacting them and why they're turning to the consumption than anything else. But anyway, and it's in this order, right? Alcohol, the numbers are much, much, much larger. And then we have, marijuana is next. We know that marijuana is legalized for medicinal in many states, and some other states it's even recreational. But it's a problem if someone's using it and, it's not something that is okay by employers. I know myself as a substance abuse professional for the Department of Transportation, we've had a lot of professionals test positive because they too are, experiencing that and they're using that to medicate. So, again, just want us to be aware of what's going on here. Pain relievers, pain pills and things like that. The painkillers of the world, we also know, what's happened with the whole opioid industry, and big pharmaceutical giants are now, facing lots of lawsuits. A really great film to watch on Netflix. I don't know if it's still around. I saw it some months ago. It's called The Pharmacist. It's about a pharmacist whose son was killed in a drug deal in New Orleans for crack, back when there was a big crack epidemic. And then he kind of became aware through trying to find his son's killer, became aware of this whole pharmaceutical thing happening, and he really tried to help bring down the big pharmaceutical giants. Of note, 80% of heroin users first started using painkillers, and as the DEA got winds of the pill mills and overdoses, and they restricted doctors putting that out there. But we still had people who were hooked on opiates, right? So then what do? They turn to heroin. So that's naturally what happened. And hallucinogens and inhalants aren't even in the 5-panel drug test that we do for drug screenings. And it's just, both of those things are just not things that you would miss, number one, and it's just not something that people do in a sustainable fashion. So alcohol, some myths around alcohol I want to talk about. We think about that your body can rid itself 1 drink per hour, like all these things that we've told people. This is not true. I mean, generally speaking, it is, but people have other illnesses. People are taking so many pharmaceuticals. People are, maybe, in a position where their liver is already dealing with so much sugars that they're taking in because we're a society that eats too much sugar. This does not necessarily apply. These are the things that people think that it's safe to consume like this. And also, it is not a depressant when we are using alcohol in small amounts. When we use alcohol in small amounts, it actually works as a stimulant, believe it or not. And the mistake that people make is, oh, if this feels good, if I have more, it's going to make me feel better. No, that's not the case. So when it gets to the point when it goes from use, and use is defined when there's no damage on the cellular level to abuse, to where the liver can't detoxify it and that blood alcohol level goes beyond that point, AIDS, or thereabouts, is when we start to have, that damage on the cellular level, and that's when we start to have the central nervous system being suppressed, so with that depressant. So, some things that you might see and hear. Now, obviously, most of us are probably not seeing clients in person, but for those of you who still are, or you can try to, gather some of these from when you're speaking with your clients. This dullness, these mood swings, slurred speech, some of these things you want to kind of look for. But what's challenging is if you meet with a client who has come to you presenting, let's say, especially for marijuana, they came to you high. It's really hard to tell the difference if they're just chronically high, like those morning, noon, and nighters. There's actually a really cute scene on Netflix where one of the guards had left, being a prison guard, and had gotten another big big deal job. And then, a couple of seasons later, they show the him come back, and he gets into the van, and his buddy's there. And his buddy like, what happened? I thought you were off to greener pastures. And he goes, oh man, they figured out that I was high and I got fired. And his friend's like, didn't I tell you that you need to be high on the very first day, because then they'll think that that's your normal. So that's what I wanted to say here. I thought that was funny, but hopefully you're kind of laughing or you want to look it up. But yeah, because if that's their normal, it's hard to tell. So, one thing you want to look for is kind of a change from a person's normal. And also maybe they look different, but, you might see excessive laughter and, no sense of time, and maybe, forgetfulness, maybe red eyes. So some of the things that you might see. And again, overall, we're really looking for changes from their norms, or they present themselves one way and then they present themselves another way. And then that's your big red flag. But again, just letting you kind of take a look at what, just a little refresher about these things. We have stimulants also. A lot of adults are taking amphetamines legally for adult ADHD, or maybe even, ADHD that was never diagnosed while they were kids. And so, those are really very closely related to methamphetamines. They're just one carbon atom off, but methamphetamines are, way more powerful. And then cocaine, and then, MDMA also has stimulant in it as well. And these are the ways that you can take it. And so again, some things that you might see is like, increased alertness, maybe agitation, their pupils are dilated, they don't eat as much, they're losing weight, they don't need to sleep as much, they feel very confident, and, everything's boisterous. So, this is some of the things that you might see from stimulant intoxication. And once again, looking for this. Maybe one day they are on that high end of that, and the other day they may be on the crash of that. So those are some of the things that you want to look for. And then you start to ask questions about how their work performance is going and how the relationships are going, and then starting to, talk about, oh, what was different this time. And those are some of the ways that we can really get into finding out what's really going on. And then also, again, using those words about, that communal suffering, collective grief, and building that trust and asking those questions and knowing what those resources are is what really gets you to be successful. and being able to understand the fundamentals of addiction in a post-pandemic world, and being able to help our clients. Opiates, as I mentioned, painkillers and heroin, all these things, highly addictive, even though doctors were told initially that they weren't. And we see a lot of student athletes being given these, and we see a lot of people who go in for surgeries and being given these, not like they used to. Used to really be that. I remember when I got my wisdom teeth taken out quite a while ago, I was given like this big bottle of Percocets, and then I was given a refill without even asking for it. And my mom just had open heart surgery, and I think they gave her 3 pain pills, and that was it. She had to ask for it to get more, which is great because the body really does have the ability to develop a tolerance to those kind of things. Obviously, people have chronic pain. We don't want them to keep living that way, but we also don't want people to get addicted to opiates, because after the 2-week mark, they're highly, highly addictive. We really don't want people to take them after 1 week, but after the second week, the probability of addiction increases greatly. Sedatives, depressants, they're the same thing as alcohol, because they have that impact in suppressing the central nervous system. So that's why, police officers pull people over, they'll put a flashlight in someone's eye, because it takes a second when your central nervous system is suppressed. It'll take longer for that signal that, oh, something is going into my eye. Iris, shut down the pupil so that we don't get exposed too much and have any damage to the nerves. And so that's a really telltale way that they can biologically see if there's a slow reaction. Chances are they're either under a sedative or they are under the influence of alcohol. So what can you do today? We really want to make sure, before we move into crisis, which is what we're going to do for the final portion of today's program, please make sure that you do your homework. Please make sure that you are aware of all the things that are available to people, because all of those resources are required for us to meet the pressures of our current existence. So I have a formula for stress. So stress, so S, is equal to when pressures P are greater than R, the resources that we have available to us. So S is equal to P is greater than R. The more resources that we can offer those that we serve, the more likely they're able to meet the pressures in their lives and be successful when we turn that formula around to R is greater than P is equal to S. And so really, please, make sure that you are aware of every single possible thing that's out there, because there is a lot out there, and, they're all new. So, do your homework, and, prevent or lower your risk by harm by taking an active role in that intervention. So you need to really this confidence that we're building here today, I want you to take that with you, and I want you to go in there with a high level of understanding of what's going on now with mental health and what's going on in this current climate. I want you to go in there with confidence and do it, and also make sure that you are doing the same for yourself as well. And be open to discuss what the client sharing with you. Also reach out to colleagues. To maybe it could be overwhelming to you. I mean, I know that occasionally I will speak to someone and I will become somewhat overwhelmed about that, and I do need to kind of process that. And I know that a lot of the mental health ambassadors and providers that I've worked with and provided services for, that they have also shared that they are also getting the help that they need. So please, this is something that's really hard for you individually as a person, but also having to take in all the suffering that's around you. Please make sure that you are also, working with other professionals and developing some of that camaraderie to share some of that burden. Okay, so crisis. We have this major upheaval. It's happening right now. So in the past, we would look at this as, a person's experience a major upheaval. We're all experiencing a major upheaval right now. And so typically when people experience that, they can either, think about harm to others, whether that is becoming violent to our spouse, abusing the dog, taking a gun and killing someone is something that people might do. And another one is harm to self, right? And that can be also in the way of abusing substances, thinking about taking our lives. So when we start to hear some of that language, please, I want you to be a hero. Heroes run towards danger. I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to think about not saying things like, oh, you don't mean it. Everybody's just going through a hard time right now. End the call without making sure that you're not assessing if there's immediate danger. Remember, you're not going to be putting any ideas into their head. Stay on the line with them. And we're not there to offer advice. We want them to just understand. We want them to know that we understand and that we care about them, we value them, and then we want to work on developing that safety plan. Obviously, if they're in imminent danger, we are not developing a safety plan. We're keeping them on the line till we can get them help. But if we determine that they, just like the suicide risk assessment, if they don't have a plan, they don't have access to the things, and it's just kind of generalized, then we really want to try to say, okay, it's not you that's not being able to get through this, and it's not you that isn't being a successful parent, and it's not you that's being a terrible husband, and it's not you that's a failure as a worker, and it's not you that's an addict. You're experiencing issues with substances. You are unable to, deal with your emotions, and all of these things are making you feel as if you can't be safe with yourself. And so let's talk about those are your problems. Let's take a look at how we can manage those problems, and focus on those options. But please, let them try to tell you what those options are. Let them first identify what it is that works for them, because I might say, which is things that work for me: growing butterflies, working out in my garden, getting on my bicycle, and building model cars. This is not for everyone. So let them tell you, rather than you trying to bend over backwards. And again, we're not trying to give them advice. We're helping them, root inside of their strengths. Okay, we want to make sure that we help them focus on options, and make sure that we have them verbalize who their support systems are, what their phone numbers are, and have them commit to keeping themselves safe. Another thing that's really important too is when they identify their support systems, I always ask them to contact those individuals and say, hey, I'm putting you down as an emergency contact. Is that okay? Because that generates a conversation and lets them know that there are other people that care about them. So that in and of itself can be therapy. And again, remember, getting as many support systems as you can possibly get. So set those clear rules. If you start to feel this way, you're going to call this person. You're going to focus, you're going to execute this option. And if that doesn't work, then you can call in. Or if you want to call in, you can call in. So have some clear rules that they can follow, because when people are in crisis, once again, we are not thinking with our human brain. So be supportive, make sure that hey, you put a great plan in place. These are things that have worked for you before. These are people that you've called and you've contacted them and you've got some really great feedback, right? And so this is really important, to make sure that we continue to follow up with that on an ongoing basis. For supervisors, we need to make sure that if you're a supervisor, you need to make sure that you are observing and documenting and talking to your employees and helping them understand what your guys' policy is, and take appropriate action when they need support, and making sure that there's a professional work environment, and have your people get training, and make sure that they also are getting the support that they need as well. This is very challenging times, and as a supervisor, you are responsible for others. And so, and if you have a supervisor, your supervisor knows these things. And if they don't, we can remind them, hey, we could really use a training, and do it in a way where your supervisor is just as overwhelmed as the rest of us, and also doesn't have a playbook just like the rest of us. So it could be that you need to ask, hey, what's the policy? Or, hey, can we make sure that, we use our time on our Zoom meetings productively, or whatever the case may be. Try to also verbalize any needs that you have, because, sometimes we think with a victim mentality, and we just kind of allow life to happen to us. You have to be the designer of your life, and you have to engineer some of those solutions. So remember, people are going to be experiencing funerals and weddings, and then people might be getting infected, and people are going through depression and anxiety. We want to help them think about strengthening those relationships, thinking about goals again. I mean, I don't think a lot of people right now are thinking about professional goals and personal goals. get them thinking about some of those things again, things to look forward to, things to work towards. Some of the things that women used to do back in the world wars is they built victory gardens. And I know that some people had talked to their grandmothers and had told them that they planted these victory gardens so that, when victory came, they would also enjoy the fruits of their labor. So, make sure that we're getting good addiction assessments going and great treatment recommendations going, inclusive of all the things that we talked about, making sure people are getting some of that balance in their work and life, that they're taking the time to unplug, that they're taking 24-hour breaks from news cycles, oh my goodness, and like 3 to 5 days from social media to get a mental load off of them, to make room into their brains to be able to do some of these things and start to think about their financial future and sort through any legal matters, and their EAP can also help them with that as well. These pandemic roadblocks are here right now, and we need to let our clients know that stuff is going to change. Situations, circumstances are going to change every single day. And we can't change that, but what we can change is not being afraid of it anymore and not catching us off guard. That's the thing. We don't want to get, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happens. Expect it. We want to help them say, hey, you know what? Something can dramatically change tomorrow. Expect that to be the case. This is the current reality that we're in. And so when we eliminate that surprise, we don't get as angry and as infuriated. And to be strategic and to help them say, what's a new way of you doing business, whether that's doing business as a parent, a partner, a personal loan, working, that is going to be an issue, and how you can do it in a way where we can serve the clients or the cause that we're involved in or our communities or whatever. Because when we can anticipate what those gaps are going to be, and when we go ahead and we put in options to reach for and potential solutions and resources for those things, again, being proactive allows us to not be in the emergency situation as much. Please make sure you're taking care of yourselves. Plant-based, 3 out of the 4 things you're going to eat are a nut, a seed, a vegetable, a fruit, a flower, a bean. Get at least 30 minutes of movement in your life. Same thing, this applies for you and for your clients. Laugh. Take things lightly. We don't have to be morbid and morose to actually be taking things seriously. We can lighten up and be silly sometimes and laugh. Make sure you get some video chats in there. Again, these are great recommendations for the people that you're serving, but also for yourself. Creative pursuits, like I said, model cars, paint things, grow things, woodworking, whatever. And start your day with gratitude. Please do not pick up your devices the first thing that you do in the morning. Please take some time to have a mindfulness practice, just to be present and breathe. Take some nice deep breaths. We need that lung health. Fill up your lungs with oxygen. So remember, aware, listen, support, assess, follow through, and offer help. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with a quote. When one door of happiness closes, another opens, but often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that has been opened for us. So look towards the door that is open for you. Help your clients see the door that's in front of them. And we all collectively need to stop looking at the door behind us and be open to your client asking you questions, right? And you being available to answer those. And if you have any questions as well, please feel free to contact me. Here are some additional resources for you as a professional to kind of help you continue to help others on their journey towards recovery. And feel free, again, if you have any questions for me, feel free to contact me. There's my contact information. And then here is kind of a longer version of my bio as well. Thank you, everyone, so much for your service during these challenging times. And thank you for taking a moment to making sure that you are prepared with fundamentals of addiction in this post-pandemic world. Have a great day.